You said something right there, like that you've targeted something. Like, how am I going to meet that person over who's also enjoying the carrot dip? It's tremendous carrot, and that person over there who's really liking the whiskey that I like.
Yeah, and they're talking to somebody way more attractive than me. So what am I going to do?
Totally. And I think it's like, but you found a reason, which I love, because there was a guy in my circles who had kind of elevated his profile a little bit long before social media. And I always remember this. And I remember he took a risk one night. We had done a show, we'd done a sketch comedy show. After the show, there was somebody very identifiable in the comedy space that everybody knew, who had just done a movie, actually was movie number 3, 4. It was like building a franchise,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. And so my buddy had a very loose connection to him. And the next thing you know, I'm talking to my buddy, and I turn away, and I turn back. He's gone. I'm like, where'd he go? He's over talking to the guy. He had found a way to make a connection.
The guy.
And I went, and everybody at the table, you could just see, like, they're scowling, like, how dare he? And I'm thinking, stones. Oh, that's brilliant. Because he had touched on it a little bit with me in private, and I thought, he goes, yeah, if that comes, I gotta capitalize on it. Well, obviously, it served him really well. It didn't directly help him with that person, but then he got sent over to somebody else. And then another thing, next thing you know, he's on the blue collar comedy tour.
Nice.
And you're like, one little thing over here, targeting, just getting really specific, which, it's funny. I often, my wife laughs at me. Did you send Hollywood an invoice? Do they owe you anything? I said, it's funny, they don't, sweetie. Hollywood doesn't owe me. New York doesn't owe me anything. San Francisco doesn't owe me anything. It's like, no, it's up to me. And what you said about self-involved, I love, because for me, it's like, put on the shell, go about your work. Just go about your work. Yeah. Okay, today I do drop-offs. Oh, the door's locked. Okay, go see if they're working over here at this commercial casting office. But you're spot on.
Look, man, we all want to get discovered.
Yes.
That's why it's literally a chapter in my book entitled Getting Discovered. I mean, one of the first trips I made here before I came was to go to Dupar's, which doesn't exist anymore, but the famous pancake house in Studio City that was a common meeting place, no different than Musso and Frank's or any of the other iconic locations that are part of old Hollywood. But we all want to get discovered.
Yes.
I just, after a while here, Burt Reynolds is a good example of somebody who kind of disappeared for 15 years and then made a comeback in Boogie Nights. John Travolta, who basically his career was gone until Quentin Tarantino resurrected it in Pulp Fiction. I mean, there's a lot of ways to define getting discovered, and there's a lot of ways that you could get discovered 5 times in your career.
Yeah.
Robin Williams being Mork and Mindy and being the comic that he was, to have thought back in the 70s that he would ever be sitting in a chair doing such a brilliant job in Good Will Hunting, you would never have fathomed that. Even Fisher King or some of the things earlier, long before that, when he was younger, you just wouldn't have. So there's a lot of ways to rediscover, redefine when you discuss being an artist. It's also one of the dangers, because we get caught up in trying to do too much. And that's what happens in those networking scenarios.
Right.
What happens in those network scenarios is we're trying to be a bee that pollinates everything too much.
Right.
And it's because we're afraid we're going to miss out on something, and we see someone else doing something like, oh, I got to run over there. Oh, I got to run over here. And all you wind up doing is overwhelming yourself and running yourself to death.
No, and in full disclosure, my buddy was, you have a stand-up career. I was an open micer for many years, just to kind of feel what it's like to be up in front of an audience. But he was very established as a host, very established as an opener, and was like a decent middler, but he knew that he needed a little. So he was a little further along. So it wasn't like, for me to put myself in that situation would have just been the fawning fan, like, hey, I really love your work. But they're never, like, I couldn't see a professional trade of some kind, some sort of tit for tat. I just couldn't see that. But with him, whether it came from that guy or I think there was a connection through each other's managers, et cetera. I think it was one of the little connection points. Who knows? But it moved him along, and he was ready. That was the thing. It was like,
yeah, he'd already gotten there, and so the truth of the matter is most people aren't.
Yeah.
Right.